Well, welcome everyone. We're excited to have you here. This is the Beverly Airport Master Plan, and I'm going to turn it to Gloria to start our meeting.
This meeting is being audio and visually recorded. Pursuant to Governor Baker March 12, 2020, order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Law 30A-18, and the Governor's March 13, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may be greater in one place, this meeting of the Beverly Regional Airport public presentation will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by the members of the public and or parties with a right and or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the City of Beverly's website at http://www.beverlyma.gov/events/city-meetings/pound. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch and to listen to the meeting may do so in the following manner. On Google Meets information, http://meet.google.com/KTVQAYZ or on the phone at 1-669-999-1955. PIN 5358-37911 or local access TV info at https://bevcam.org/video/live-stream. Hi, I am Gloria Bouillon. I have led the airport as the airport manager for the last 3 years. Before I go any further, I want to thank all the stakeholders involved in the airport master planning process who have helped us to get to this point. Beyond airport businesses, the Airport Commission, the communities of Beverly, Danvers, Wenham, and Mayor Cahill. Let me share a little history on the context of how we came up with the data you are about to be presented with today. At this time, I will ask that anyone that is not muted, please mute your microphones. When I assumed the role of airport manager, one of my first tasks I was given was to evaluate the planned demolition in the width of the airport's primary runway and come up with a solution. This would have had undesirable implications for our businesses and communities. It quickly became evident to me that there were some issues with the plan and that we needed to take a fresh look at the data. Therefore, I recommended to develop an airport master plan, which I have worked with on a number of other airports as well. For those of you not familiar with an airport master plan, you will hear about it in more detail. Though the value it brings, it is more comprehensive and strategic look at the needs of the airport for the next 20 years. The last airport master plan was conducted approximately 20 years ago, and then another update was conducted in 2009 to the forecast during the economic recession. There was a shift that had started in approximately 2014 to slightly a larger aircraft. The airport has grown in volume in approximately 51% in 4 years. This is significant growth and begs to look at the current infrastructure. Even during COVID, the most difficult time for airports nationwide, we still have had increased growth. That growth continues today, and through much collaboration with Massachusetts Department of Transportation, Aeronautics, and the Federal Aviation Administration, our project team of engineers and planners, we bring the most preferred alternatives to develop the airport in a sustainable path forward. And I say most preferred because it is the least invasive, most cost-effective, and positions Beverly Regional to be successful over the long term. What this translates is to increased revenues, job creation, and business growth for the communities we serve. I introduce Hillary Fletcher and Jim Nicholas from Aviation, a Woolpert company, and will be available for questions.
Thank you, Gloria. Welcome, everyone. We're excited to have you here this evening, and we're excited to talk about the future of the Beverly Airport. We're going to go through quite a bit of a presentation here, and we'll be interspersing some opportunities for questions and comments, and I'm going to walk through a little bit more information as we get started. So today we're going to talk about the inventory and forecasting elements of a master plan and how that's put together. We're also going to talk about facility requirements, alternatives, and then our recommended development concept for the airport. We want to make sure you're aware of next steps and the next opportunity when we'll be holding another round of public meetings. And then we want to open the microphones up, so to speak, and take your questions and hear your comments. So with that, I want to touch a little bit about this virtual meeting setup. So throughout this presentation, we have, we'll intersperse 3 intermittent Q&A sessions. Those are for clarifying questions. So if there's something that you don't understand, feel free to ask a question at those designated spots. We will have a general Q&A session at the end of the presentation, and at that time we'll be welcome to hear any and all of your comments. Our meeting is being recorded, and you may also get that information on the website for the master plan. Just check out www.beverlyairport.com and you'll see a master plan tab, and all the information will be there. As mentioned earlier, if you would please mute your microphone when you're not speaking, we would appreciate it. On the bottom of your screen, you'll see a function to raise your hand. If you would use that when you'd like to speak during the Q&A session, we'll call on you in a progressive order, just so we can make sure we get everybody an opportunity if they have a question. There is a chat function. We just would appreciate that you don't use that for public comment. If you're having an issue with microphone or any part of the presentation for a technology perspective, that's great to log that into the chat, and we'll see if we can help resolve that. We really appreciate your patience. We're excited to be doing this, and we'll get into it. So I want to touch briefly just a little bit about what we've been going through in the aviation industry with COVID-19. As you're all aware, there's been a tremendous impact to the aviation industry, though I do want to stress that the strongest recovery point has been for the general aviation airports and operators across the nation. They have weathered the storm better than our commercial partners, and we'd like to see that continue. Beverly has done exceptionally well and had solid activity throughout the COVID pandemic, and actually have had operations at 103% compared to their pre-COVID activity. So that's very favorable. I mean, the airport serves an incredibly important function for the North Shore, and we're excited to see that it's thriving despite all of the conditions going on around the country. I want to talk a moment just about the master plan process and why we're here. As Gloria mentioned, the airport had a series of master plans done, and the last one was in 2009. It's very common to see airport master plans updated every 10 years or so, 10 to 12 years. And it is a 20-year plan, so updating it intermittently is appropriate. This is really designed to look at the long-term development of an airport. It is important that it's done so in a manner that's thoughtful and strategic, and that it's reflective of community values and input. And we like to take the opportunity through the master planning process to raise awareness about the airport for community members, and share thoughts and ideas about how the airport can serve the community. It's very important that a master plan and the FAA's requirement for this master plan must be based on the current conditions as they exist today, community input, and then the forecast of activity into the future. And it cannot and should not have a predetermined outcome when we start the process. So we're moving through this, and the plan is evolving as we make every step, and we're excited to present the work that we've done to date and talk about what's coming next. So just to understand a little bit about how a master plan comes together, We are have been focused on looking at existing conditions, if you will, at the airport. We've been looking at everything in an inventory sense on the airport. We are looking at then the forecast. So you'll see some information here shortly about existing aircraft that are based at the airport, activity, operations at the airport. And from that, we take other information that we'll be talking about in a moment and project that activity into the future. From there, we look at what it's going to take to meet that activity level, what kind of solutions need to be done to make any capital improvements so that the airport is well positioned to handle that activity. And from there, we then go into our implementation phase where we look at the financial planning of those projects, how they come together, the sequencing of them, and the funding availability. The airport enjoys a strong relationship with MassDOT and the FAA in terms of receiving federal and state grants to assist it in its development, and those are very important financial partners in the master planning process. And then the final step is to have approval and adoption of the master plan. And it becomes a guiding document for the airport as it looks at development opportunities. So we're in well underway in this project. We had a little delay through the initial part of the pandemic, the beginning of the year in 2020. We have spent time over the last several months working through alternatives and working with the FAA and MassDOT to make sure that these alternatives meet their design standards and are acceptable from the regulatory perspective. We are anticipating to come back to the community to have another round of meetings in April to talk about what we've gathered from our input phase right now with community meetings. We'll go back, we'll fine tune our work, bring back the implementation plan, and move forward for adoption in June of 2021. And I do want to reiterate, all of this information is on the master plan website. So before we go any further to get into the sort of the details of the master plan and the work effort, I want to see if anybody has any questions on what we're doing and why we're conducting a master plan. Do we have any questions?
I don't see any hands raised.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to turn this over to Jim to talk about some of the effort we've been doing.
Okay, terrific. And forgive me, of course, my internet decided to really slow down significantly at this particular moment. Can you hear me okay? I did call in on my phone here.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, terrific. Thank you very much. All right, well, welcome everybody. I appreciate your attendance here today. As Hillary had mentioned, we're in the middle of a master planning process. And while we are just now reaching out to the public through these types of forums, there has been a lot of work that's gone on up to this point. And we're sharing this with you now because we genuinely want and need your input on the work that's been conducted to this point. Hillary had touched on the basic approach we have in a master plan, but fundamentally, it's pretty simple. As we do an inventory, which is to investigate what conditions we currently have at the airport. We then do a forecast to project out where we think the airport may go in the future in terms of operations and things like that. Then we determine what facilities we might need to have in order to meet that potential forecast. We develop alternatives to then figure out if we can actually build those facilities to meet the needs that we think are going to happen. And then we come up with a recommended plan as well as a cost plan to figure out, what the costs and the implications and some of the other impacts that might be associated with that recommended plan. So it's a pretty basic approach to things, but there's a lot of work that goes into each one of these individual elements. What I wanted to touch on, I'll focus relatively, as Hillary noted, that we're going to have a couple of stopping points. So if you have questions, please hold on to those questions until we get to the next stopping point, and then I'm more than happy to to get into as much detail as you'd like, or as we can in this forum. So, as I mentioned, when we start off with a project, we dive into airport inventory. And Hillary, you can hit the next one. A little bit of history actually about Beverly Airport for those that might not be familiar with it was originally built in 1928. It was dramatically expanded by the Navy during World War II. Frankly, as you'll see in some of the slides coming up, that much of the airport still really is based on that configuration that was built by the Navy, 80 some odd years ago. The role of the airport, as defined by the FAA and by MassDOT, is that of a general aviation reliever or a business class airport. It's really important to recognize that Beverly Airport is not a commercial service airport, nor will it be a traditional or a commercial service airport in the future. It simply is not configured for such an operation. It is a general aviation airport. Just to clarify also on what general aviation is, it's pretty much anything that's not what you would consider to be a commercial airline type operation. It's going to be your small single engine aircraft. It's going to be your business jets. It's going to be helicopters, police operations, things along those. That's general aviation. Those are the aircraft that are operating on a daily basis at Beverly Airport. In talking again about the FAA and MassDOT, I mean, they view this airport, Beverly Airport, as really being the preeminent business class airport on the North Shore, serving the North Shore and the northern Boston metro area. It's an important airport, not only for the host communities, but also again for MassDOT, for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, for the FAA, and for the region. As an example, I'll just note really quick that in 2019, MassDOT did an economic impact study, just as a reflection of the type of benefits that the airport does afford the host communities. It's estimated that the airport generated over $34 million of economic activity, for example, for the three host communities. And that's not even getting into things like businesses that are maybe located within the areas, largely because is the airport that we can go to the next. A couple of other facts about the airport. It is located in 3 jurisdictions. It's located in the city of Beverly, in the town of Danvers, and the town of Wenham. And I have a graphic that shows exactly where that is. But all three towns, all three municipalities have a piece of Beverly Airport in their community. And that's actually reflected on the Airport Commission, where there's representatives of each one of the towns on the Airport Commission, as have been representatives of each one of these municipalities, been participating in a project advisory committee that has been established as part of this as well. Currently, the airport is about 105 based aircraft. In 2020, there was about 69,000 operations that occurred on the airport. And to clarify what that is, an operation is either a takeoff or a landing. So roughly about 69,000 operations. And that has been slowly increasing a little more rapidly over the past couple of years. But even with COVID, and the decline, frankly, in most of aviation, Beverly Airport has seen an increase in operations over that time. And that's much due to the restrictions on travel because of COVID, with the decline or the reduction in commercial service operations, and from safety and security. People are choosing to fly general aviation as opposed to getting on a commercial airline when they have to go. The last thing I just wanted to mention about Beverly, and this is one of the questions that we often get about airports, is if
Jim, you're cutting out.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, we lost you there, so that's
okay,
much better.
Sorry. All right, I'm going to just hold this up to my mouth then. But Beverly does have an air traffic control tower that operates most of the day. There is a one shift that doesn't operate, but it is governed by a air traffic control tower. You can go to the next slide, Hillary. So this is an overview of the airport, and I won't get into a lot of detail, but I do want to touch on a couple of things. The fundamental structure of any airport is going to be its runways, and Beverly has two runways. Runway 1634 is the primary runway that runs from the north to the southeast. That runway is 5,001 feet long by 100 feet wide. Its Crosswind Runway runs generally east-west, which is runway 927. And that runway is 4,755 feet long by 100 feet wide. For those of you not familiar with how runways are identified, just so you know, when we say that a runway is runway 16, that generally follows the magnetic heading of that runway. So you'll notice that every runway, if we identify it, should be 180 degrees different. So 1634, it's 180 degrees because you're going 3-4 in one direction and 16 in the other direction. Well, as long as the runway is designed and aligned appropriately, hopefully it is 180 degrees, ideally. For Beverly, though, we have these two runways. It is, again, still largely based on this old military configuration. In fact, there was an old runway that has been decommissioned a number of years ago, but you can still kind of see that on Taxiway Fox as the remnants of that old runway. The taxiway system that it currently has is still largely based on that old military configuration. And that has been something that's been slowly addressed by the airport, but there's still there's a long way to go still on that. And that's something else we're going to be talking about here a little bit later. And then I did want to mention that the airport is really fundamentally divided into two sides. There's a west side development area and an east side development area. And those are the areas where the hangars are located, aprons are located. On the east side is the area where there's the new admin building. There's a fuel farm on that side, and that's where the tower is, along with a variety of different hangars and businesses. On the west side, that's where the airport's primary fixed base operator is, and what that is really the business that's designed to service the larger aircraft or the corporate aircraft that are coming in, and they provide fuel and other services for the folks that operate in that capacity. But it's 470 acres. There's a lot packed into 470 acres at Beverly Airport. And I just want to note two additional points on here. Is that highlighted in red there's two hotspots, and these are areas that the FAA has identified as areas on the taxiways that we need to address as part of this master plan. So I just wanted to call that out, and I'll talk about that here in a little bit. You can go to the next slide, Hillary. So this slide, what we wanted to emphasize here is that, we don't master plan. We don't plan for airports in a vacuum. We recognize that airports are settled in a community, and there are neighbors around, and the airport wants to be a good neighbor. And as we are looking at things within the airport, we also can't be blind to the fact that, again, that we lie within 3 towns. And sorry that it doesn't appear all that strongly here, but there's a white line that runs along the northern edge of the airport. That is the border of Wenham and Beverly, and then Danvers is on the west side. But as I mentioned, three municipalities exist on Beverly Airport. But besides this, beyond the towns, there's zoning and there's land uses that we need to be aware of. Residential areas for sure. A robust roadway network that exists around the airport. Industrial parks, and obviously environmental resources. There's a lot of wetlands around the airport, as well as Wenham Lake. So water quality is certainly an issue. And these are all things that we have to consider as we're looking at specific items and facilities on the airport itself. So again, that's why when we're trying to plan, we want to plan smart, and part of that planning smart is coordinating with stakeholders like you all, like the folks that are on the various committees that we have in affiliation of this effort. And so again, we try to engage folks to the best of our ability to make sure that we're considering all these other factors that are out there. And at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is strike a balance. We're trying to provide facilities for needs at the airport while balancing it against, you know, the other considerations that exist around the airport. You know, the next, Hillary. And forgive me, I'm hearing some feedback on my side. Is that from me? And if it is, I apologize. I'm trying to figure out if this is working okay. But okay, moving on. Just in association with what I just was talking about in terms of balancing, it's part of our mandate on the master plan. The FAA requires us, as does MassDOT, requires us to consider a whole range of environmental factors. And there's 20 plus environmental categories that we're required to look at in association with the airport and its existing condition, as well as on any of the alternatives or recommendations that we come up with. And we consider things like air quality, groundwater, noise, light emissions. One of the things we wanted to mention is that we're currently in as part of this effort, undertaking a noise analysis or a noise study to generate noise contours for potential noise impacts that are affiliated with the operations at the airport. So that should be completed. Well, it'll be completed certainly before our next meetings in 2 months. And anything that comes out of the master plan, any of the recommended plan, will undergo you know, federal and state environmental reviews before proceeding on with any type of development. And those will happen in a broader sense under the umbrella of the master plan. But for any time one of these projects is proposed, there's associated permitting efforts that are going to be affiliated with that will need to be undertaken. So there will be no shortage of environmental reviews as part of any of these recommendations that may come out of the master plan. You can go to the next slide, Hillary.
So Jim, I'll talk about this just briefly.
Yeah.
You know, I wanted to share that, you know, the airport has really embraced Gloria and her team an approach to sustainability. And it's not, it's all encompassing. So it's fiscal sustainability, it's environmental sustainability. It's really looking at everything that they do in their decision making to make sure that it is thoughtful, it is encompassing community values, and it's really furthering a good, strong organization and future for the airport. So again, they've done some great examples of environmental work, fiscal sustainability, anything from upgrading their lighting system with LED lighting on the runway to, which is a future project slated, to the energy efficient admin building and looking at opportunities to utilize facilities. So it's a great approach. We're happy to see the airport embrace that and move it forward. And Gloria, do you have any comments you'd like to add to that effect?
Yes, thank you, Hillary, for that. We and the mayor of Beverly has also been putting sustainability as a forefront in their priorities. And today, aircraft utilizing the airport now are more fuel efficient and less noisy than ever. As technology has changed, our own businesses have also introduced and implemented their own environmental sustainability programs. And much of our equipment is battery operated and solar operated, and that was given through grants through the state of Massachusetts. So we are constantly evaluating our fiscal responsibilities and land uses as well. So thank you, Hillary.
Great, thanks, Gloria. All right. So let's move on to forecasting. Jim.
Okay, back to me. So we talked about inventory. So we touched on what's currently on the airport. Now what we are looking at is in terms of where do we think the airport's going when it comes to forecasting activities at the airport. A little bit of background. You can go to the next slide, Hillary. The market area this is an approximation. This is not exact. This is based on an FAA methodology of establishing a 30-minute drive time around the airport. But what this speaks to is that the airport serves as a transportation resource, not just for Beverly, Danvers, and Wenham, but really for any of these towns on the North Shore. And just in this one example here, and that's not to say people from further than 30 minutes away don't come to Beverly Airport, but we're touching on 38 towns here. And I can promise you, with the facilities and the accommodations that the airport has, you are certainly, getting up into into Haverhill and Methuen and probably in New Hampshire at certain points. So as I mentioned before, this facility is important to the Commonwealth, to the region. And so when we're looking at things like forecasting, we consider not just what happens locally, but also what happens within the larger region. And you can go to the next one. And so as I mentioned, some of the considerations we look at things from a national perspective in terms of what are the national general aviation trends in terms of a business use, because a lot of the activities that occur at Beverly Airport are business use. Other activities related to flight training and business and piston operations. We look at things on a more localized level in terms of regional population trends and employment and personal income and economic development. There are correlations that can be drawn between economic activity and development and activities at an airport. We look at those as well. It's also incumbent upon us to consider how the FAA views the airport, and what they generate their own forecasts annually, and so we have to consider that as part of our efforts. And so when we go through these efforts, we go through a variety of different methodologies. I think in this case we came up with 16 or 17 different factors or methods that we worked with the airport on, and ultimately these forecasts have to be approved by the FAA. And and then we can go to the next slide here, Hillary, is that these forecasts we're presenting here have been reviewed and have been approved by the FAA, even in the context of COVID. We had actually had these approved when COVID hit. Obviously, that kind of threw a ringer into everything. But the FAA has since gone back, reviewed what we've submitted to them, and they are still in agreement with the methodology and the approaches that we've instituted as part of this effort. So what I wanted to touch on in this slide is really there's three primary elements that we look to in a forecast. And purely from a numbers perspective, we will forecast based aircraft and aircraft operations. And currently at the airport, we've got, as I think I mentioned before, we have 105 based aircraft at Beverly Airport. And in 2020, we had approximately 69,000 annual operations. Based on the various methodologies and our coordination with the FAA, we have settled on an average annual growth rate of about 1.1 to 1.2% for both operations and aircraft, which basically effectively means is that the number of base aircraft and operations will continue to grow. It'll grow at a modest rate. We've seen certainly spikes in activity, like we just had, a 3% growth over this past year. But typically in aviation, for every one of those spikes, you'll see a couple of down years. And so things will average out over a period of time. And so what we're reflecting here in this growth on an average annual basis is over that 20-year planning window, we're again going to be averaging about 1.2 and 1.12% growth for these two factors. The other component of what we look to in a forecast is something we call the critical design aircraft. And this is a tool that the FAA has established to correlate activity at an airport with the actual facilities. The facilities that are designed at an airport and the standards that are established by the FAA are based on the types of aircraft that operate there. And typically what we're looking for is something, again, we call the critical design aircraft, which is going to be the aircraft that is deemed to be that has the greatest operational requirements that operate at the airport with enough frequency to essentially require to have facilities built for it. And the way the FAA does that is they have a specific number. They have this number called, they have a number of 500 annual operations. And so what they look for is they look for the most demanding aircraft that operate at the airport at least 500 times a year. And again, an operation is either a landing or a takeoff. They have a coding system that's generally reflected here in this graphic. That is a coding system that reflects both the operational capability of an aircraft as well as their size. And I can get in all kinds of detail in the Q&A if you want to get into it, but I'm going to keep it at a pretty high level right now. Suffice it to say that the letter is related to the operational capabilities, really the speed of the aircraft, and the number behind it is related to its size. And Beverly Airport is today and will in the future remain what we call a B2 runway, which is the aircraft that we're showing in the bottom right-hand corner. That's what it has been, and that's what it's projected to be. So that is the largest aircraft and most demanding aircraft that typically operates at Beverly Airport, and is what's projected to operate through the planning period. This is the same type of aircraft that is currently operating at the airport. In fact, it's a little bit different style of aircraft. The one that was identified previously was actually a little bit larger aircraft with a Falcon 900 for those that are familiar with that. But this Cessna Citation Latitude really is an aircraft that operates very frequently at the airport. And so it makes sense for us to identify that as being the critical design aircraft today. As a point of reference, an airport like Bedford or at Hanscom, which is a larger corporate airport, will have a C2 or a C3 designation. A commercial service airport in Lake Logan is going to be a D category, or like a D5, a D6, or something along those lines. So just to give you a little perspective in terms of where Beverly is situated in terms of that range of these potential design aircraft, we're sitting at a B2, whereas much larger airports are, C and D categories. Just here, I think we can go to the next slide, which is what our clarifying questions are. So there was a lot of information dumped out.
Right. So again, if you have a question, if you could use the raise your hand function, we'd be happy to answer any questions with regard to the inventory and the forecasting.
Hillary, I don't see any hands raised.
No hands raised. Okay. All right. Then we will move forward, and we're going to move into the facility requirements. Jim?
Okay. And again, if something pops up down the line, we will have another break period. So if other questions come to mind about any of these things, just, please, you can raise them at our next little break. Okay. So again, following the process, inventory, we know what we have today. Forecast, we project where we think we're going to be in the future. Now, how do we relate that projection to the ground? What kind of facilities might we need in order to meet that potential demand? Sorry, is that me with the feedback? No. All right. So I will do my best to talk over that.
Excuse me. Gloria, do you want to mute me? Because it might be from me.
I'll mute you.
I can't mute. So, yeah. Thank you. That might help.
Oh, there we go.
That's better.
All right, perfect. Just raise your hand, Hillary, if you want to be unmuted. So facility requirements, again, we're correlating the forecast to actual facilities on the ground. So we're trying to identify what the needs may be in the future. And just not to spoil the next step, which is the alternatives phase, it's during the alternatives phase that we determine, based on those needs, what can we actually build? What can we actually do? What can we afford? What kind of impacts? Where do we strike that balance that we talked about earlier in terms of what can we accommodate in terms of needs versus what the potential impacts may be on the airport and the surrounding areas? With respect to facility requirements, we collect a lot of information from a lot of different sources. Part of that is that we conducted some user surveys for the people on the airport's tenants, pilots. We actually had a couple of pilot focus groups to get a better understanding of what aircraft they're operating, how they're operating them, so that we have a real clear understanding of what their actual requirements, are, and what are appropriate really for Beverly, and not just more is better, but what specifically do we need for Beverly and for the people that are operating there. We have to follow requirements that the FAA dictates, and we look at some specific elements that are focused on the air side, which is going to be, again, your runways and taxiways and aprons. There's landside facility requirements that we look at, which would be hangars, areas, access roads, fuel supply, other airport facilities like vehicle service roads and things like that. And we'll talk more about that here in a second. Other inputs, the FAA and the state do regional system plans, and there are other plans that we have to consider. Again, we're not planning in a vacuum here. We need to consider everything that's being done in the community and around the community and around the Commonwealth. You can go to the next slide, Hillary. So we're going to touch on a few of these. I'm not going to read through every one of these. Again, we can revisit these in the Q&A. What I did want to mention, and I'm going to talk more about the runways here in a second. I'll probably hold that one until the next slide, where I've got a more robust slide about that. But what I did want to mention about this really goes to the taxiways. And as I mentioned before, the current taxiway system is really built on a 80-year-old World War II configuration that was based on the needs of 80 years ago. It is not appropriate for modern operations. I mean, it can be used, but it's certainly not ideal. So one of the things that we've had to really look hard at is how do we upgrade how do we plan for an upgrading of the taxiway system to enhance the level of safety for aircraft operating on it, as well as the level of efficiency for aircraft operating in the taxiways. And then you can go to the next one, Hillary, and we can talk about runway length, because this is usually a topic that people are very interested in. What this graphic represents is a runway length analysis that we conducted for the airport. And again, as I mentioned, we're just identifying potential needs here. We're not saying that this is what's going to happen or anything like that, but I just wanted to share with you the way that we look at runway length when it comes to facility requirements. What's reflected in this graphic is a range of the aircraft that are typically operating at Beverly Regional Airport, and these are the most demanding types. These are business, medium-sized business class aircraft that are operating relatively frequently at the airport. And each one of these lines for each one of these aircraft indicate a runway length requirement that they would have if they're operating at their maximum capacity. It would be ideal if every one of these, that we could accommodate each one of these things, but from a realistic perspective, that's not typically the way that we plan. In planning, our goal is not to satisfy the aircraft with the longest need, but to identify a length that can reasonably address the majority of the needs of the most common users of the airport. And so while each one of these blue lines and these red lines actually reflect the design aircraft that we've identified for each of the two runways at Beverly, those show the runway length requirements for that latitude that I'd mentioned. Vertically, we're showing the length of what we currently have at the airport. Again, the line on the left is runway 927, which is the Crosswind Runway, and then the line on the right is runway 1634, which is the primary runway. Again, we have to balance the need of the aircraft that are operating here along with the practical realities of surrounding areas. But the overarching message here from this graphic is that while the pilots are operating on 5,001 feet and 4755, they are currently taking penalties because of that. They would like to have more runway length, and I don't think they're shy about that. What's incumbent upon us to do here is to figure out if there is a way to meet that need in a practicable manner that doesn't that considers the factors that surround the airport, and to figure out what that balance is. Again, we're not just identifying the longest runway length requirement for the biggest aircraft and saying, well, we have to go with that. We're trying to figure out, again, what it is that, what we might be able to achieve to help make the airport more operationally capable. And we'll talk more about that. I'm sure there'll be some questions on that too. You can go to the next slide, Hillary. Other factors here on the airfield, we will be looking at, pavement strength to make sure that we have appropriate pavement out there. One of the things I wanted to highlight is that, and this goes with the sustainability component that Gloria had mentioned, is that progressively the airport lighting will be transferred over to LEDs for environmental and financial considerations. Other elements that we need to look at are obstructions, trees. We're in New England, and trees grow really fast around here, and they can grow up high enough to that they could actually potentially interfere with the approach and departure paths of aircraft that are arriving and departing the airport. So we need to consider those factors as well. You can go to the next slide, Hillary. On the land side, I touched on, or I mentioned hangars and aprons. The projections that we're showing, we are showing steady growth, and we're showing, not only are we showing steady growth, moderate growth, but steady growth. We're projecting a larger percent of those numbers to be accommodated by business aircraft, as opposed to the small single engine airplanes. And there's a lot of benefits for those using those types of aircraft. It's newer technology. Frankly, they're quieter. They don't operate as frequently, but they also have individual needs like hangars, like apron space. And since Beverly is an older airport, again, starting 1928, there's challenges associated with identifying areas for potential development on the airport. But that's part of one of our mandates as part of the master plan, is to identify those potential areas for future development. You know, the next slide, Hillary. Other support facilities, a vehicle service road. One of the bits of information or some feedback that we received from the tower is that, as I mentioned, the airport is really kind of divided, is divided by to a west side and the east side. And the tower had noted that vehicles that are going back and forth, and these are vehicles that are like the fuel trucks or things like that, airport-related vehicles right now are having to cross over the primary runway 1634, which is not an ideal circumstance. And so they're requesting that we explore options for how to establish a vehicle service road that will navigate around the airfield, again, with the idea of maximizing the degree of safety on and around the airport. And there's a variety of other factors that we look at in terms of maintenance of the airport, what equipment is on the airport, and making sure that we have an appropriate the appropriate types and numbers of aircraft of equipment, for the airport. You can go to the next slide, Hillary. So that's a very high-level overview of identifying the needs that we may have at the airport, based on the forecasts that we had gone over previously. Now, this next section, which is the alternatives analysis, again, this is all preliminary. This is really, again, we just had meetings yesterday with the Project Advisory Committee, with the Airport Commission, and we're soliciting feedback for the results that we have established at this point. So again, it's really important that, if you have comments, to please submit your comments or provide us with feedback. We want to make sure that this is consistent with what
the needs of the airport are and the needs of the community are. What's important to note here again about this master plan is that this is your master plan. This is your airport. This is your facility. And we want to make sure that it reflects the character and the needs of Beverly, of Danvers, of Wenham, and the North Shore. So going into the alternatives, this is the process. This is the place where we are looking at how might we be able to accommodate some of those demands. And a couple of things I just wanted to note before we get into the alternatives, and is just identifying a few goals. And some of those goals are that it's incumbent upon us to meet aircraft or airport design safety standards that have been established by the FAA and MassDOT. And those are largely based again on those design aircraft that we talked about earlier. The FAA and MassDOT are all about safety and efficiency, but mostly safety. So anything that we propose, anything that we do has to fall under the umbrella of meeting those safety design standards that have been established for airports, not just the Beverly, but for every airport within the country. We want to again also support and enhance the airport's existing operational safety and efficiency. That goes hand in hand with what we just mentioned, or what I just mentioned in terms of the FAA. Safety and efficiency are paramount for the airport. We want to do our best to address the needs of the people that are operating on the airport, or the people that are working at the airport and are deriving a living off of activities at the airport. As I mentioned before, the airport is an economic generator for the community, for the North Shore. And as an economic generator, it's to the benefit of the community to maximize the utilization of this asset as an economic generator. And certainly, and it's last on here, but certainly it's not least, is we want to minimize any negative impacts to the neighbors and to the environment. The airport wants to be a good neighbor to everybody. It's been there for a long time. But again, that doesn't mean that the airport doesn't need to actively engage with the surrounding community and do its part to be a good neighbor. You can go to the next slide, Hillary. So instead of walking you through each of the alternatives and coming to the conclusion, I'm kind of spoil the ending here for us with this slide, just so we can kind of share, and then we can dive further into each one of these elements here. My daughter hates it when I spoil the ending of movies, but I'm going to spoil the ending here for everybody. We have conducted a preliminary assessment of the alternatives and reached the following preliminary conclusions. Again, these are preliminary, pending feedback from you all, from other stakeholders, from the public, from town officials. So certainly these are open to change. Related to runway 1634, and I've got a slide here that we're going to get a little bit further into that details. We have looked at and have identified a development alternative that maximizes the operational safety factors associated with runway 1634, the primary runway, and enhances the operational effectiveness and benefits for aircraft. For the Crosswind Runway 927, the results of the analysis associated with that runway is to continue to maintain its runway length, but actually to narrow that runway to meet existing FAA design standards. In terms of the taxiways that I mentioned before, again, oriented on World War II configuration, we've identified a long-term plan to increase the operational safety and efficiency for aircraft operating on the airport. And I've got a graphic that'll relay that. In terms of any of the pavement changes that are occurring here, in terms of impervious surfaces, what we're proposing here has a net reduction in the amount of impervious surface on the airport. Again, that goes back to some of the environmental considerations. We try to minimize the impervious surfaces as best we can. So even on some of the things that we're proposing right now, some of the changes, because we're also not only proposing some new pavements, we're proposing removing of a lot of old pavements. We actually have a net reduction on that. Our landside development is designed to to maximize some of the financial sustainability for the airport and the development potential for area businesses. We've identified a potential orientation for a vehicle service road, again, to enhance safety and security and efficiency for the vehicles that are operating on and around the airport. And from an environmental perspective, certainly some of our mandates are minimizing wetlands impacts, minimizing noise impacts. And again, we're doing a noise study to help quantify some of that. Minimizing light impacts, upgrading to LEDs to promote, again, environmental sustainability as well as financial sustainability, and establishing a recycling and reuse program for the airport. You can go to the next slide, Hillary. Getting into further details on the runways. So we had looked at a variety of different alternatives related to runway 1634, and some of them showed potential runway extensions, because that's incumbent upon us to consider that as part of this master planning effort. But as we worked through the challenges associated with a longer runway, given some of the constraints and the boundaries around the airport, and in our work with MassDOT and with the FAA and our stakeholder group, we settled on a single plan. And what that plan is would be to help enhance safety on that runway by paving over, and I'll show it to you here in a second, areas on either end of the runway. They're called runway safety areas. And those safety areas are areas that are mandated by the FAA to, in the occasion of an aircraft that might overrun a runway, need to be able to sustain the weight of an aircraft. And what the proposal is, in association with the FAA here, is to pave over that area, which is 300 feet on either end, to enhance the safety benefit of that safety area. Now, the ancillary benefit for operators on that is that operators will net an additional 300 feet of departure length on that runway. So instead of them having just 5,000 feet of departure length being available, or 5,001 feet of departure length available, they would actually have 5,301 feet. I will note, though, that the landing lengths on the runway remain exactly the same. What we're essentially doing is we're keeping the existing runway, as well as maintaining the existing safety requirements as defined by the FAA, paving over part of those areas to enhance safety, but also to benefit the operators. So we are not extending outside of the existing runway environment that currently exists today. In an effort to also enhance or maintain safety, because this is the primary runway, the FAA design standards for a B2 runway, which is our critical design aircraft, is actually having a width of 75 feet. And ordinarily, the FAA would only fund for 75 feet of width on that runway. However, they recognize that this is an important runway for the airport, for the region, for the Commonwealth, and they've agreed to fund the paving of the entire width of the existing runway. So they're exceeding their own standards in order to maintain the existing level of safety that exists on that runway. And this plan, and I'll show you a graphic of what this actually looks like here in a second, is again supported by both the FAA and MassDOT. Not only do they support it, but they're also willing to fund it. Moving over to the Crosswind Runway, runway 927, that also is a B2 runway, similar type of sized aircraft. But the FAA says it looks at that runway a little bit differently. It's the Crosswind Runway. It's a secondary runway to the primary. That is not one that they're willing to fund beyond their design standards. So that runway, which is now currently 100 feet wide, just like the primary runway, is actually going to get narrowed to 75 feet. And so that extra 25 feet of pavement will ultimately be removed in conformance with the FAA standards. The FAA does advocate for maintaining the existing runway length of 4755, but again, we're going to be narrowing it down. Okay, you can go to the next slide. And this is where we start looking at some of the graphics that reflect the alternatives that we had that we're presenting today. We actually had, I don't know, probably 20 alternatives, which some of them are kind of crazy, but these are the ones that we settled on. They're the most reasonable ones for us to consider. Alternative one, which is one that's on the screen here right now, really is just your existing runway. This is exactly what's out there today. 5,001 foot of pavement length and 100 feet wide. There is a displaced threshold on the runway 16 end on the left side of the graphic. I will note that there's these trapezoids that lie on either end of the runway, and there's also this larger green rectangle that surrounds the runway, as well as a smaller yellow rectangle that surrounds the runway. These are all FAA regulatory safety standards that have been established that have various requirements for us to help again maintain safety on the runway and for any of the aircraft operating here. So when the FAA looks at a runway, they look at not only the paved sections of the runway, but they're also looking at it through the lens of these runway safety areas, the object-free areas, the runway protection zones, and in fact, there's a whole raft of other safety criteria that exist around a runway that we're not even showing on here. But for our purposes here today, we wanted to focus on these three critical ones. And what we wanted to emphasize is that right now the runway is generally compliant with these safety criteria, and we're not proposing that we change any of that. The only change that we're proposing here, and you can go to the next alternative, Hillary, which is alternative 2, which is really the alternative that is being recommended as being the preferred alternative. The only difference that is occurring is that we are proposing paving 300 feet in that yellow area on either end of the existing runway. The size of that yellow area, that runway safety area, hasn't changed. The size of the object-free area hasn't changed, nor the runway protection zones. In fact, the thresholds haven't changed. The numbers are exactly where they are today, is where they're going to be in the future. But what this alternative does is that if an aircraft were to, on the chance that it were to overrun the end of the runway, instead of it trying to stop in grass, which oftentimes will cause damage to an aircraft or create greater issues, it'll be paved. It'll be able to sustain the weight of an aircraft. The ancillary benefit of that for the operators is that while they can't land on that extra bit of pavement, they will be able to take off from that little bit of pavement. So that'll net them a little extra room for departing. So going back to that graphic we had where we showed all the various runway length requirements for those different aircraft, adding 300 feet is going to help them a little bit. It's not going to meet all of the requirements that potentially were reflected in that graphic. It's going to be an incremental benefit to them, but it's not going to be a dramatic benefit. But they would appreciate anything that they could possibly, any improvements that we could possibly afford them. So the way the FAA will look at this runway is that the aircraft will still have 5,001 feet to land on, but they will have 5,301 feet to take off on either direction in this alternative. And again, we're maintaining the 100-foot width on this. The third alternative is really, one that's more of the traditional runway extension, where we are really significantly extending the runway on the approach end of 16. We're applying some criteria that the FAA calls declared distances, where we try to maximize the operational capability of that runway. As we talk this through with the airport, with the FAA, with MassDOT, this was deemed to be really a bridge too far because of the potential impacts that might occur up towards the Wenham and Danvers line on the 16 end, and for the benefits that would be achieved on here, the investment just didn't seem to make sense. And so, again, we settled on that alternative 2, which is the next slide, Hillary, which is just a repeat of alternative 2. as being our preferred alternative, which again is that 1634 remains as it is today, a B2 runway. The safety areas remain the same, only we are putting pavement on top of the grassed areas of the safety area. So instead of grass, it's going to be pavement. That will net safety, improvements, as well as an additional 300 feet of departure length for aircraft operating on that runway. We'll maintain the 100 feet of runway width. And again, this is something that's supported not only in spirit, but also financially by the FAA. Going to the next slide, this really just reflects runway 927. So this is the Crosswind runway, the secondary runway. And this runway is 4,755 feet long by 100 feet wide. And as I mentioned before, it too is a B2 runway, but this is not one that the FAA or MassDOT is willing to extend to maintain a runway width beyond the current standard. So in this case, while the thresholds will remain exactly as they are and the pavement ends will remain exactly as they are, the runway ultimately will be narrowed down to 75 feet in conformance with FAA design criteria. You can go to the next slide, Hillary. This slide has a lot of information on it, and I'll try to walk through this as best I can. I'll start with, as I mentioned before, that the taxiway system at the airport is based on a World War II configuration, and that is, does not conform with current practices. And what this plan represents is not something that's going to occur tomorrow or in 5 years or in 10 years, but this is probably a beyond 20-year projection in terms of how the airport might be developed over the long term to conform with current taxiway standards and design requirements to operate, in a better and a more efficient and safer manner than it is currently today. That's not to say the airport doesn't operate safely today, but there's always room for improvement. And so generally, what's being reflected here are in blue are parallel taxiways that may be constructed over a period of time that border either side of runway 1634 and potentially parts of runway 927. If and when those taxiways were to be constructed, we're also showing some red areas. These are the old taxiways. These are the old pavements that would be made redundant by new taxiways. And so these are areas of pavement that would ultimately be removed because they're not needed. As those taxiways are eventually, relocated and developed and old pavements are removed, that does open up for some potential landside development. And that's kind of marked here in some dashed lines with some with the lighter color underneath them. So again, these areas are largely not available for development today, but they might be in the future as some of these taxiways are moved and developed again over an extended period of time. Another element I wanted to point out is there's a thin blue line that runs along the very north of the threshold of runway 16. That's a dark line, and what that represents is a vehicle service road that we would propose to construct. And as I mentioned before, as you go from the west side or the east to the east side or vice versa, currently fuel trucks have to cross over the primary runway 1634. That is certainly not the ideal circumstance. So establishing a road around the outside would make for a safer environment and make it easier for those types of vehicles to move from one side to the next. That would not be a public road. That's going to be a private road. That's going to be only for airport vehicles. We're not going to be able to do a cut through from Beverly to Danvers by way of the airport road. So I just wanted to be clear about that. But this reflects, though, a long-term goal, and as well as identifying, as we move towards those goals, where opportunities may ultimately develop as we start moving in that direction. And so again, this is something that reflects a long-term vision for the airport. And I will note that the runway 1634 that's being reflected on here is the one that's being proposed in that alternative 2, the preferred alternative. So you can see that we have there's a little bit of additional pavement on the ends, the 300 feet, and the taxiways meet up in that area here. Again, this is not a foregone conclusion. This is just a preliminary plan. So we can go to the next slide, Hillary. Oh, there we go. Okay, we can unmute Hillary. I've been talking a lot here, so I'm sure there's some questions that have come out of what I just went through, and I'm certainly happy to answer anything that we can. You can raise a hand. Laura. Up. We have to unmute Laura. Here we go. Hang on, I'm not hearing Laura.
I don't hear her either.
I'm sorry, Laura. Technology is wonderful, isn't it?
Laura, if you want, you can call in as well.
Can we unmute Hillary? I don't think I have the ability to.
I'm trying to. I'm actually having a difficulty doing that.
Hillary may need to briefly stop using the presentation, and that will give her access to the command to let her unmute. I don't have the ability to unmute here, and I'm admin.
Okay, well, we're navigating our technical issues. I think that Laura's dialing in. But any other questions? I don't see any other hands raised yet. Sure, there must be some questions.
Any questions? Can you hear me now?
Yep, I can hear you, Hillary.
All right, thanks.
Laura is not currently muted, but we're not hearing any sound from her.
Looks like she's trying to call on her phone. You might hit. I think you might need to hit *6, Laura, which unmutes you on your phone. I think that's what I had to do.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, quick feedback. You turn your volume, maybe you turn your speakers down.
Okay. Is that me? Okay, I just want to know what's involved with the noise impact study.
Okay. Got to talk through that. So what we're generating are noise content. So effectively, what that is we at this fleet we look at this operation.
Hey,
Laura,
could you turn down the volume on your PC, please?
And my PC
Sorry for the extra hassle.
got the sound. Oh.
Wow.
Okay, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I think that we're good now.
Much better.
Hey,
Oh,
there we
okay.
go.
Okay, I just wanted to know what was involved with the noise impact study.
Sure. So what that is what we're doing is this. There was a noise analysis that was done probably about 15 years ago, and so it was time for us to time for the airport to update something we call the noise contours that exist around the airport, and what those are day-night levels of ambient noise that get factored into a noise model that's utilized by the FAA to project, as I said, ambient noise level around an airport. So what we're currently doing is we have a subconsultant that's actually working on generating those. And so what that will reflect is existing conditions, so existing operational levels, existing aircraft fleet mix, existing flight paths. And through this system, we identify where the noise exists around the airport and where problem areas may be. What we do also then is looking at the forecasts, we project out where noise levels might be in the future in 5 years, 10, 15, 20 years as well. What we're trying to do is, again, establish a baseline of where the noise is today and where the problem areas may be. So it's really just, it's as I said, it's establishing a baseline right now.
Okay, so do you go to the different neighborhoods to do this? I mean, I know that's probably a stupid question, but
no, it's not a
know.
stupid question. No, there are different types of noise analyses that are done. This noise analysis that we're doing is admittedly a basic one. We're not going out putting noise monitors out in neighborhoods because does happen. You're right. On a more robust effort. What we're doing here as in affiliation with this master plan is, again, it's more of a modeling exercise based on existing operation levels, aircraft, and all this information and data and flight paths and flight tracks get pumped into this model that's utilized by the FAA and by the military, actually, I believe also utilizes it. And it spits out the answer, basically, is what it comes down to. And that's where we start from. And so if things need to happen afterwards, then that at least we have a baseline from which we can start speaking.
Okay, thank you.
And
Certainly.
we have one more, and Jim, we have one more question from Teresa.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Hi. Yes, absolutely.
Hi, James. Hi, Gloria. Hi, everybody. So I'm just sort of going to piggyback on Laura's question concerning the noise. I'm on Trask Street, and the shorter runway is like right up over the hill.
Okay.
And there are many times where the planes or the jets taxi out and they sit there. And the noise level is very loud, and also the fumes from the engines. I mean, literally just fill my home. I'm wondering what the policy is on that. I mean, how long can they taxi and sit there before they take off? And is there a barrier in play at all that would separate San Fonso Road, up on the hill, that would help with Trask Street neighborhood?
Jim, if you want, I can answer that question.
Yeah, would you please? I'm trying to find track.
Sure. So Teresa, if you are talking about jet aircraft sitting, sometimes aircraft have to do run-ups before they actually depart. So they're checking the engines, they're checking the everything that they need to do required before the flight. There's also a hold release time that some of these instrument flights have to wait for their release time if there is a ground hold somewhere else. So sometimes it's called like an air traffic delay or ground hold. So we are, I'm looking at Trask Street now on maps, and the airport is slightly elevated from where the actual road is itself. That is, it's mostly what you're describing is from jet aircraft where they do run up. They do it right before they actually get onto the runway.
Right. Well, they've sat there for 30 minutes. And I mean, I don't know if that's acceptable, or, I mean, can't they check their instruments before they make that turn? I mean, the noise, you know, I've lived here my whole life. I can deal with that. It's the fumes.
Mm.
I mean, they're basically, when my windows are open, I mean, my house is filled with the fumes, and it's happening a little bit more consistently, maybe because I'm home because of COVID, you know.
Mhm.
I do see that it happens more now. And you know, it's a concern for my abutters as well, these
Sure.
Mhm.
fumes. I mean, you know, can they sit there for 30 minutes? I mean, is there a way that we can kind of avoid it or work on this?
Sure, absolutely. I understand your concerns. I will discuss this with the tower manager,
Yeah.
and see what we can come up with as far
Okay.
as far as.
Sorry, 1 second. You have to go. Grammy wants you. Okay, I love you. Bye. Sorry.
You're fine.
I'm babysitting. Not babysitting, kid sitting, right? Okay, that would be really great, and if you could get back to me, because yeah, I mean, I can see 5 minutes, you know, but
Mhm.
I've timed it, and literally, one time I was walking my dog, and the 30 minutes there were planes that were landing, so that jet was sitting there. And I was just like, if all these planes are coming in, why is it taxiing so up, you know, close to the neighborhood? Why doesn't it just sit back and do
Yeah.
its thing and then come up? I mean, sitting there for 30 minutes is, you know, I think that's just a little too much.
So thank you for your comment. I will discuss this with the air traffic manager to see how often this does occur.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right.
And
That would be great.
my information.
Teresa, sorry, Laura, go ahead.
Sorry, my information is actually on the end of the slide. So if you want, if you could send me an email and I'll follow up with you.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I will. Actually, I think I did reach out to you guys last summer, and the email that I got was pretty much nothing you can do. It wasn't a very I'm so glad we're having this meeting. It wasn't you know, very accommodating. So, and I've lived here forever, and you know, it's just, especially with now what's going on, you guys are going to
Yeah.
have more commercial flights in and out. I mean, you know, that's my only concern, is those jets just sitting there.
Sure, we understand that concern, and
Okay.
I will get back with you. Yes.
All right. Thanks, Gloria.
Thank you.
Teresa, I'll just add in too that if there's an opportunity where that does occur and you actually have the date and time, that's really helpful for Gloria and in her conversation with the tower manager.
Okay.
If that happens.
Yeah, that's true.
Well,
we can
I
provide
did.
that.
It happened where I gave them the information when it was going on, and you know, and it wasn't received well.
Okay.
So
Well,
I'm not
definitely.
sure who I sent the email to, but yeah, it wasn't received well. It was sort of like, nope, this is what we do. Sorry. And I mean, I've lived here forever, and I just think that that's, you know, that's not a normal. It wasn't a normal thing, and now it just seems like it happens a lot.
Sure. Understood. Thank you.
Thanks, Hillary.
Do we have any other comments? Any other questions? Clarifying? Okay. Well, I'm just going to finish up a couple slides here.
Sorry, Hillary.
Oh, we do.
We have one
Laura?
Yeah, one more question. About the vehicle road, the service road, when do you know that will be approved or not? I mean, I must have missed that in the presentation, because I think that's a really important thing to have.
Well, I mean, the way that the way the process works is that we identify the projects. They ultimately get put into a plan for when they're going to be, you know, various projects get developed. So that will be included. I couldn't tell you what the timing is on it, when it's going to be. You know, I know it's a higher priority.
Okay.
So it'll be I hate to say it's probably we're going to be within the next 10 years. I can't promise it's going to be the next 5 years, but when we're doing these planning efforts, it's a long-term view. And so by the time we finish this effort and the funding gets available and all the rest of it, it does take a number, it takes a number of years to get these things implemented.
Okay,
It's not
thank
very
you.
good answer to you. I don't have a hard answer for you. Sorry.
And
That's
Laura,
okay, thanks.
when we come back in April for the next round with the implementation plan, we'll actually put together a 5-year, 10-year, and then the remaining 10 years for the 20-year, length of the master plan. So we'll be able to approximate that. Again, it's just going to be in a general conversation with the FAA about funding availability. So we will provide a little bit more information around that when we are at the next round of meetings.
Okay, thank you.
Much better answer than mine, Hillary. Thank you.
Any other questions before we move on?
Hillary, this is Bob.
Yes.
I might also add to address Laura's question is that that particular project is also a high priority for the FAA. I know they're keeping their eye on that, so there is support for the FAA to get that done sooner than later, but they've got to work it in with the other projects we have in the capital improvement plan.
Thanks, Bob. Okay, well, I'm going to move on. We have a couple more things just to wrap up for our meeting this evening. So I want to make sure. So I want to talk a little bit about next steps and where we're headed in this process and where you can participate again. So as I mentioned, we have just talked through this evening phases 2 and 3, the investigative phase and potential solutions phase. We are open to receiving more comments. We understand it's a lot of information to give you in one evening. So we are holding a series of meetings and we'd like to entertain your comments. So if you want to submit comments to us, we'd like you to do so, and I'll give you some information here in just a moment, but up until February 26th. So we're going to have a comment period. So any comments that you have, Laura, Teresa, your comments are excellent. Encourage you to submit those also through this email. And then we will be back to talk about phase 4, this implementation piece, and we anticipate that to be sometime around April. So for next steps, the chapters that we've gone over are all available now. Actually, all 5 are up there. What we've talked about today has been a high level. So if you're interested in going in and reading those are on the airport's website. Just hit the master plan tab. We're holding these virtual community meetings and we really appreciate your participation tonight. Next week, we'll be meeting with Danvers and Wenham on Wednesday night. Then once we have a sense of that, we'll begin to work on the implementation plan, as I've mentioned, and the ultimate product, which is an airport layout plan. The noise contours, we're expecting to have those back as well, and we'll be sharing those results when we're back with you in April. So again, for the content that we've shared with you this evening, if you could submit comments by February 26th, there's an email address here for Jim, and if you want to mail in, just throw a note in the mail, send that off to the airport, and Gloria will collect those as well. Again, just, your comments are focused on any aspect of what you've heard tonight. The summary of what we're talking about has certainly been around the runways, the taxiway realignment, the potential for the VSR, and making sure that we're meeting the needs of the airport and balancing it with the community. So please give thought to that. We really would like to get your input and any other thoughts that you may have. So again, just before we wrap up, are there any questions, anything else that you haven't had a chance to ask that you'd like to share with us at this time? Okay. Well, we want to thank you for your time this evening. I'm going to hand it to Gloria for some closing comments, but really appreciate everybody's interest in the airport. We're really excited about the future, and we want to make sure that we're listening to the community. So thank you. Gloria, do you want to have any closing thoughts?
Just thank you, everyone. Again, I would like to reiterate what Hillary said. Your comments are very much appreciated, and we always are evaluating how we can do things better. What, like your your statement, Teresa, is a very valid statement. So things like that we always evaluate when I can get together with our stakeholders. So thank you.
So with that, everyone, have a great evening, and again, thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.